I am truly honored to introduce our next guest, who is a tireless advocate for workers' rights. And I had the opportunity of meeting Deena on a rally last Wednesday. My days are just flowing into days. For the past 29 years, Deena Ladd has organized alongside workers for decent work in sectors and workplaces with low wages and unstable employment. She has worked to support and develop grassroots training, education, and organizing with groups. Her organizing work included the Fight for 15 and Fairness campaign, which became the Justice for Workers campaign after winning the $15 minimum wage. The Justice for Workers campaign has also keyed in on organizing communities to support lower wage CUPE education workers. And I'll just add that it was so great to see you at the Justice for Workers campaign and the emergency rallies this week to tell Doug Ford to keep his hands off our Charter of Rights. Come on, you guys can do better than that. We know we fed you and everything, and you're still, whoa, whoa. I want to hear it louder. And when Deena gets up, I want you guys standing up. Deena is also a key organizer in the Decent Work and Health Network, as well as the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. In recognition of her life's work as a leading workers' right organizer, this year, Brock University presented Deena with an honorary doctorate. Please join me in welcoming Deena Ladd.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. I have to say, when I got the doctorate, my kids started laughing because they know that I'm not very academic. So they thought, do they know what they just did? Anyways, can you all hear me at the back? So I have a really loud mouth, so I'm hoping that I don't just like deafen the front row here. Anyways, so thank you so much. It's so great to see you. And what a fabulous dinner, eh? Very nice. I don't think I've eaten so many vegetables in my life. So as Michelle said, I work with an organization called the Workers' Action Center. And for those of you who may not know what that is, it's a nonprofit organization, but we are a membership-based organization. But our membership exists of non-unionized workers. And I just want to take a minute to explain what we do. Because what we do is we basically see ourselves bargaining for 6 million workers that rely on employment standards in Ontario. So there are 6 million non-unionized workers that basically rely on the Employment Standards Act. And the Employment Standards Act is basically a piece of crap, to be honest. And that is why we had our 15 and Fairness campaign, and we fought to make improvements, which I'll get into. And now we have our Decent Work agenda, and we have a whole bunch of, I've brought a ton of materials here if you're interested in finding out more about what I'm talking about. But basically what we do at the center is we run a hotline, an emergency hotline in 7 languages, and any worker in the province can give us a ring and ask us about a problem at work if they're non-unionized. And we get actually a lot of unionized workers calling us as well. And we invite those workers, so workers come to the center, they may have not been paid their wages, they're not getting overtime, public holiday pay, vacation pay, basically all the things that we should be able to take for granted when we go to work, right? And then we invite them into the center and they learn how to fight for their rights. They learn how to make the best case possible to fight their employer, and they learn about direct action. Because many of the workers that come through our doors can't wait 6 months to get their wages. I'm not sure how many of us in this room could wait 6 months to get our last paycheck, right? $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, $10,000 of wages unpaid. That is normally what happens to many workers coming into our center. Right now, we're working with Parkdale Community Legal Services for a caregiver, a live-in caregiver, who's owed $32,000 of unpaid wages and has been waiting 8 years to get that money. So we train people to figure out how to defend their rights. We go visit those employers, and we do delegation visits, we do protests, and we occupy their offices until they pay those workers their wages. Because even when a worker files a claim in this province and the Ministry of Labor says, oh yeah, you're owed this money, the Ministry of Labor does barely anything to collect that money. So to me, it's really hilarious to see how quickly the government is responding to the public education workers to make sure that they're going to pay their fines when they do a big fat zero to make sure that employers pay their workers their wages if they're non-unionized. And the fact is that workers have to wait for years, and it's only when they manage to find themselves to the center, when we start to have to take direct action against those employers, do they actually pay up, right? So as I said, we're a membership-based organization, and so we have our organizing committees all across the Greater Toronto Area. Our members go out in their own communities in their first language to do outreach on the streets, to do apartment building door knocking, to do workshops where people are looking for work, and in libraries and in health centers. We have a leadership program called Feet on the Ground, where we train people how to do community organizing, where they work 1 day a week for about 10 months. And what we do is they work in their first language, in a neighborhood, in a particular sector, and they do grassroots outreach and organizing to build the activities of those workers in our organization. And we connect and work with communities who are severely impacted by precarious jobs, right? Where people can't find work except through temp agencies, can't find work except through subcontractors, or misclassified as independent contractors, are in part-time work. And we get them involved through their own individual experiences of wage violations or employment standards violations, and we say, get involved. If this happens to you, what's to stop your neighbor, your co-worker from experiencing the same thing? If we have to fundamentally change this, you can't walk away. You have to be part of the labor movement. You don't. So I think part of what I want to say to you is that the labor movement involves my members, right? They are working alongside you, even though you're in a union, to improve the wages and working conditions in this province. And so that is the kind of work that we do on a daily basis. So I want to talk to you about the critical moment that we're in right now. And I'm sure that you are very aware about this, how unconstitutional things are right now. But what I want to talk to you about is, how did we get to this point? Did this just kind of come out of nowhere? Because let me tell you, back in 2018, when the Ford government was first elected, who was the first on his list of attacks? It was non-unionized workers. 6 months before this government was elected in 2018, we had just passed legislation that would bring workers' wages up to $15 an hour, that would, for the first time in the history of this province, would provide every worker in this province 2 paid sick days. That would allow workers in workplaces less than 50 the right to even take an unpaid day off if they were sick. Before that, they didn't have it. It brought in equal pay for equal work, so you couldn't call someone part-time or temporary or casual and have them doing the same work as a full-time worker and pay them half the wage. It brought in scheduling rights, and I don't know if you remember, but it brought in card check for personal support workers and security guards. Personal support workers. And within 6 months of this government coming into office, they overthrew that legislation. And we entered the pandemic with no paid sick days, right? Not a single paid sick day, and wages going down, and no scheduling rights, no equal pay. Personal support workers would have had stronger unionization rights. That was all stripped away. And I think it's really important to remember this history, because it's important to remember that where we're at right now comes on the backs of many workers that he has attacked before he's come to public education workers. Now, as you can imagine, we were devastated when that legislation was torn away from us, because we worked damn hard for that legislation. And you and the society was right there with us in terms of solidarity and pushing for that bill to be passed. But did that stop us? No. What we did was then we moved that legislation up. So now we fought for federally regulated workers to have now 10 paid sick days. That was passed, and they come into effect on January 1st, 2023. British Columbia, we worked with non-unionized workers in BC, and now they have 5 paid sick days. The Yukon is just about to legislate paid sick days as well. Federally regulated workers now have a $15 minimum wage. That all did not happen by accident. We just shifted our ability to move the struggle and to support the rest of the country, because in this province, all of our rights were stripped away and those gains were taken away, but it didn't mean that we couldn't push for them for the rest of the country. And so that was really important, and we did that. I also want you to remember in 2019, and I think that this is a really important thing. On September 25th in 2019, a father of 2, Enrico Miranda, was killed on the job. He was working for a food manufacturer called Fiera Foods. Have you heard about Fiera Foods? Yes, right? 5 workers have died at Fiera Foods over the past few years, and under Ford's watch, Enrico Miranda was the 2nd worker that died. Enrico Miranda was working for Fiera Foods through a temp agency for 5 years when he was killed on the job. And what's really important to know is that in 2017, legislation was passed that would make Fiera Foods fully responsible for Enrico Miranda's death and not the temp agency. So the client company that uses these temp agencies, they have to be held responsible from the top. They need to be stopped from using the temp agencies and subcontractors, and they need to be fully held responsible for any deaths or injuries. And so this is a huge loophole, right? This is why temp agencies get used in the first place. This is why we're dealing with subcontracting in the first place. And so Section 83(4) of the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act was passed by the Liberals, and then the election happened, and all it needs is Doug Ford's signature. That's all it needs. And guess who refuses to give his signature to that legislation? And so still, 6 years later, temporary agency workers have no protection from their client. They can't hold the client company responsible if they're injured. And that's why we occupied Doug Ford's office with the Ontario Federation of Labour and many activists back in 2019 to send a strong message to Doug Ford that every worker, no matter if they're a union or if they're not a union, they deserve to go home at night and not be sick or injured or die on the job. And that was a huge protest that we did back there. So you can see the level of attack, and it continues. 2020, pandemic came in. He refused to bring in paid sick days. He absolutely refused to bring in paid sick days. Every Ontario worker that was not in a union did not have, and many workers in unionized private sector companies don't have paid sick days either, to be honest. Many of the grocery store workers that you see that have collective agreements, and if they're part-time, they don't have paid sick days. That's why the paid sick day campaign during the pandemic was such a critical campaign, because it was saying all of us, no matter who we are, it's not like the pandemic says, oh, well, you're in a union and you have paid sick days, so I'm not going to infect you. But, you're a non-unionized worker and you don't have paid sick days, so I'm going to leave you alone and I'm going to go after the person who has paid sick days. That's not the way it works. And so what was crazy is that we had bill after bill being launched at Queen's Park. We had full party support with the Liberals, the Greens, and the NDP. They brought that legislation 3 or 4 times, and they voted against it 28 times, against paid sick days. And then, but did we give up? No, we were relentless in our organizing, and we forced him in May of 2021. Do you remember when he cried on TV? That's when he cried. So sad. Yeah. I mean, give me a bloody break. He cried his eyes out because he was so, it was just really difficult, because, he works a lot of hours, right? He has to work so hard. And we forced him to bring in 3 paid sick days. And we have now managed to ensure $200 million went to support workers for those paid sick days, which is really critical, because that helped workers take a day off to get vaccinated, that helped workers take a day off when their kids were sick, that helped them take a day off when they were sick, but it's only 3. And you know what's really crazy is that those 3 days that were brought in April of 2021, though you're supposed to use them for over 700 days. So they expire in March of next year. So did he increase the amount? Did he make it 3 days per year? No, 3 days total. And workers have to go to their employer and they have to ask for those days, because they're not employer paid, they're provided by the government. So they have to go, please, sir, can I have a paid day off? Did you know about this legislation that was passed in 2021, where I can take a day off that you can apply to get compensated for if I take a day off? Now, if you're in a non-unionized job and you're worried about pissing off the boss, do you think you're going to have that conversation? Absolutely not, right? So people aren't taking those days, and they haven't taken those days, and many workers have just had to go to work sick. And that's what the daily reality is for many of the people that I work with. They just go to work sick. And those 3 paid sick days are paid by our tax money. So those corporations like Amazon, Walmart, Metro, Sobeys, Loblaws, who made the most incredible amounts of profit, more than they've ever seen in the last 3 years, we paid for their paid sick days. Shame, shame on this government. And so no wonder public education workers are having a hard time holding on to their 11 paid sick days, because they're surrounded by Ontario workers who have a big fat 0. So you tell me, I want you to think about your paid sick days that you have in your collective agreement. If you are surrounded by 6 million workers who have nothing, do you think they're going to have sympathy for you when you go on strike for paid sick days and when they're trying to take away your benefits? Absolutely not, because there's nothing there. That is why non-union and union workers have to stick together, because as non-unionized workers, we can raise the bar, we can raise the floor, and you can raise the bar, right? So if we fight for every single worker in this province to have 10 paid sick days, then public sector workers and workers in your union can fight for more, and you're not always watching round the back thinking your paid sick days are a target. But everybody has to get raised, right? So that's why it's so important for us to all work collectively to raise the floor, because we cannot have 6 million people surrounding unionized workers who have nothing, right? Who have nothing. And that's what this government is intent on making sure that non-unionized workers have, is zero, right? And that's unacceptable, and we're not going to stand for it. But you know what's amazing is that after the pandemic, we're still in it, but do you remember then all the stories started to come out? Oh, those workers are lazy. They've been surviving on $500 a week and they don't want to go back to work. They're just used to, drinking beer at home and just like resting, and they don't want to work. They just want to collect benefits and employment insurance, and and we've got to force them back to work. But actually, what's been happening is that we're not experiencing a labor shortage. We're experiencing a wage shortage. We are experiencing workers for the first time saying, I'm not going back to your crappy job. I'm not going to go back to a 20-hour-a-week job with no benefits, no paid sick days, where I have to juggle 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. That's not what I'm going to go back to, so I'm retraining. I'm moving into a sector where I can have better working conditions. And so now what those companies are doing is they've said, okay, well, we're not willing to increase our benefits and our wages, so we're going to bring migrant workers in. And they're not going to get citizenship. We're going to get them with a labor market agreement. They're going to be tied to me. If they speak up against me, I can deport them. I'm going to make them live where I want them to live. I'm going to control them. And if they say anything, they get deported. That is what's happening. And so I think we have to really understand what's happening here in the moment, is that we have to understand how this government different levels of government are pitting workers against each other, right? They're pitting union against non-union, workers who are part-time against full-time, people who have full-time jobs and are hired directly against temp agency workers, people who are Canadian citizens against migrant workers. And do you think those migrant workers want to come into this country and work in indentured labor? Absolutely not, which is why we have to make sure that any worker coming into this country has status. Because if people are good enough to work, they're good enough to stay. And they're good enough to be able to have a permanent residency in this country. But once you open the door to employers to have the absolute ultimate control over their workforce, then what you are doing is you are basically saying to that group of workers, you are not on the same level of me. You don't deserve the same human rights, the basics, labor rights, workers' health and safety rights to me. It's okay if you get exploited. But that is exactly what's happening in this country. We have 1.2 million people coming into this country with no access to PR, permanent residency. They're on temporary work visas. They're through these labor market agreements. They're working on our farms. They're looking after our kids. They're looking after our seniors. They're working in meat processing plants. They're working in food manufacturing, in hospitality, in hotels. They're doing all these jobs. But if they speak up, they're gone, just like that. And that is absolutely unacceptable. And so we have to make the links in our struggle, because if we don't, if we say it's okay for this group of workers to be left behind, then we are next. And that's what I'm telling you, is that there has been a lineup of workers ahead of the public education workers that have been under assault by various levels of government. And so I think there are sectors in this country that are lobbying the federal government and the provincial government hard to bring in more and more migrant workers without permanent residency. And I think it's really important that we need to know how draconian the laws are right now. As you can probably tell from my accent, I wasn't born here. I came here in 1987 with my family, and we are working class people. My dad was a car mechanic, and my mum was an office worker. We didn't come in with bags of money. We came here in 87, and we managed at that time to pass through the point system. And we came into this country with permanent residency. So we had access to labor laws and to human rights, and to be able to get a job without fearing of deportation. But if my family was to come in this year, we would be coming in through a temporary foreign worker program. We would be indentured to an employer, and I would have been separated from my mum and dad. It would have probably been my dad that would have come in. He would have had to come in through this program. We would probably not seen him for many years. And then if my mum was able to go, again, same program. And our family would have been separated. And wouldn't have seen them for many years. But this is the reality that faces all of the workers, many of them who I work with at the Workers' Action Center, who are migrant workers and who are doing cleaning, personal support work, healthcare work, doing incredibly important jobs that are the backbone of our communities and do not have PR. And so I really want us to make the links here because it's so important that we understand who are doing the essential jobs, right? So now I want to just kind of move a bit closer to our friend Monty, who's the Minister of Labour. You know, he's our friend, right? He's a friend of the working class. He puts it out on Twitter quite a lot. And he dresses in his, steel-toe boots, and he puts on his, his T-shirt and tries to sort of mingle with the average worker. Now, we started hearing this phrase, working for workers, when he was running for re-election. And this is a bloke who has ignored paid sick days throughout the entire pandemic, and all of a sudden he's like, I'm your friend, vote for me. And so he was so concerned that workers in precarious jobs were having a hard time coping through the pandemic. So they created committees, they looked at the future of work, and do you know what came out of that consultation? Working for workers for him means that workers who deliver food for things like Uber, Skip the Dishes, DoorDash, that they can now use the washrooms. That's a critical labor right issue. So working for workers, part one, basically said at the end of the day that gig workers who deliver food for us, the employer, the restaurant, has to let them use the washroom. That was it. Can you believe that? And he thought that this was revolutionary and that this was like, him standing up for workers. And then Working for Workers Part 2 happened. If that wasn't bad enough, he then said, so he had this big consultation. And again, we brought workers who were truck drivers, cleaners, Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, food delivery workers. And the main message that they said to the government is, give us employee status. We are workers. We want to be covered by basic labor laws. We'd like to get overtime pay. We'd like statutory holidays. We'd like public holidays. We'd like the minimum wage, thank you very much. We'd like to be protected by basic labor legislation. I don't think that that's too much to ask for. But you know what? They came back with Bill 88 that was passed in April of this year, that delivery drivers and ride-share drivers are only entitled to the minimum wage when they're actively working. So now what they've done is they've created a substandard condition, classification of work, where basically active engagement is only when you are paid. So can you imagine if you worked in, say, a restaurant or in a coffee shop, when you were not actively serving someone, that you wouldn't get paid? Think about that. That's basically what they're doing to delivery drivers. So you have to be on call, you have to be waiting, you have to be fully engaged and ready when you get the thing, but you're not going to get paid. Think about personal support workers who have to travel from home to home to home. They don't get paid in between going to people's homes. If a client is too sick and they have to cancel their appointment, they're not going to get paid for that visit. This is the deterioration of working conditions that I'm talking about. This is what the reality is of so many people are dealing with. And now what the government is doing, and I think we all need to be paying very close attention to this, is that what Uber is doing and what they've been doing in the United States very successfully is they've been saying to the state governments, in exchange for not giving basic labor laws, give them portable benefits. So the workers will get some basic benefits in exchange for giving up their rights as a worker. And that playbook is coming to Ontario. Right now, the government has a consultation happening looking at portable benefits for precarious workers. And what they're going to do is they're going to create another category of workers where basically employers will be able to say, well, I'm not going to call them regular employees. I'm going to give them this category of workers, and then they'll get portable benefits, and then I won't have to give them any rights. This is happening right now. Right now. It's very scary what's happening. We are in the process of going down the US style of rights. And as Gabe talked about, like, we don't want to go down that way. We don't want to go that way. We have to keep the line strong. So to me, that is why this moment is so critical. Because if we can try to send a strong message to this government that they can't pick on public education workers, then it makes our fight to protect all these workers in precarious work possible. Because we have been under assault for the last 6 years, and it has been relentless. It has been relentless during the pandemic, because we've had to fight for basic compensation through EI. We've had to fight for basic paid sick days. We've had to fight for workers to have basic access to employee rights. These are hundreds and thousands of workers in Ontario. This is not a little percentage of people. So I think, what's been amazing also, what's been happening in the United States is that we've also seen an unprecedented number of union drives, right? Amazon warehouse, Starbucks organizing in sectors where it's been incredibly difficult to bring in unions. But workers are fighting back in the US, and workers are fighting back here. And non-unionized workers have been fighting by basically saying, I'm not going to take your job if you're going to give me substandard wages and working conditions. We are fighting to uphold these rights, and we're fighting against this relentless attack every single day. And on November 28th, Bill 4, which is another attempt by the NDP to bring in paid sick days for every single Ontario worker, is going to be in Parliament. And my bet is that the government's going to try and vote against it. But whatever happens in the next week or so, that might make them give pause, right? Because if they are challenged by the union movement joining together with the rest of us in the labor movement to really push back, maybe they'll say, okay, you know what? We can't attack non-unionized workers again. And so that's why our working together is so important. Bill 124, the attack on public sector workers, the lowest voter turnout in June in the history of this province. These are all signs in which workers in our province have been disaffected and have been waiting for this moment, right? People decided to not vote because they were so disaffected by the Ford government and did not know what to do. But this is all culminating now. This morning, which was so amazing, is there was a poll basically saying, you probably talked about this, is that people are blaming the Ford government for what's happening with public education workers. That is so critical right now, right? We have public support. We have public support for paid sick days. We have public support for higher wages. We have public support for decent work. This is our moment right now. It is now kind of coming together in a way that we haven't seen in the last 6 years. And so I think that's why this moment to me is so exciting and why I'm having difficulty sleeping at night, because this could be an opportunity for us to really unite working people together, right? And to stand up to a bully, to stand up to someone who couldn't give a toss about paid sick days as a basic fundamental human right during a worldwide pandemic and felt absolutely confident that he could get away with that, right? Like, that's why this is so critical. So we have the power to take action right now and to stand up for all workers in this province. And so that's why I wanted us to take that photograph, because public education workers are afraid right now. They're being bullied and intimidated every single day. The union is being told, no, 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 you can't do this, you got to give in. That's why seeing solidarity and seeing, I know you guys were out on the streets during lunchtime, you were at Dundas Square. We have to keep that going. I want you to take all the posters that are on this table and put them up in your neighborhoods and in your communities so we can show the widespread support that public education workers have from the public, but also for paid sick days, also for immigration rights for migrant workers, also for those workers who rely on basic employment standards. They need your support. They really need your solidarity right now. And I am so excited to sort of stand here with you in this moment and to see this potential unfold, because, you know, we can't leave anyone behind right now. And that's what this struggle is all about. So I want to thank you for listening and, you know, solidarity, right? Solidarity. 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 Woohoo!
Thanks,
They're
Deena.
getting a bit tired. Yeah.
Deena, thank you so much for your uplifting words. We all have so much work to do to defend and empower workers of all stripes, and especially the education workers under attack by the Ford government. So thank you for engaging with us, having our folks listen to what you have to say, because at the end of the day, as workers in this province of Ontario, every single one of us have to come together and support each other. So thank you for that. The work that you do and the rest of your team does at the Workers' Action Centre is essential and it's inspirational. And I'm really proud that the society supports you on that.